Welcome, bonjour. My name is Tammy Scott. I'm the Director General of Communications and Public Engagement at the Canada Council for the Arts. On behalf of Council, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our 2018 annual public meeting. I will be the MC for today's event. Je salue tous ceux et celles qui sont présents aujourd'hui et
I salute everyone here today, and I'd like to welcome the people watching us on the web in Canada and in the world, as well as people on social media.
Be in English and French, and the speeches will be available soon on our website in both languages. Merci à l'équipe de traduction simultanée ainsi.
Thank you to the team of simultaneous translation and sign language interpreters in French and in English.
We're on traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin peoples. I'd also like to recognize the contribution of Indigenous peoples to our history, unique identity, and to the emergence of a common future. On the agenda this afternoon, updates and insights into the year ahead from our chair, the chair of our board, Pierre Lassonde, and our director and CEO, Simon Brault. Les allocutions seront suivies d'une période de questions.
The speeches will be followed by a question period. We will answer the question of the people present here as well as online. You can also send your questions before the meeting, and we will also answer those questions. Those who are online can contact us at the hashtag board18. We will try to answer all questions, but it is possible that we run out of time. We'll try to answer on our site over the next few weeks.
Exhibition space just downstairs on the ground floor for our vernissage of the newest exhibit entitled Constructed Identities. It's a packed agenda, so we're excited to get started and share all of our news with you. Let's get started. J'aimerais commencer par vous présenter.
I would like to introduce to you now the chair of the board, Mr. Pierre Lassonde. Pierre joined us in June 2015. Philanthropist, a great art collector, and Canadian art enthusiast, Pierre firmly believes that art should benefit all Canadians.
Mr. Pierre Lassonde.
Merci, Tammy. Je tiens d'abord à remercier.
Thank you, Tammy. I'd first like to thank everyone here for attending this Canada Council annual public meeting in person as well as those online. Your presence, whether in person or online, is visible and virtual, proof of the importance attributed to the Council works. I'd also like to welcome the Government of Canada representatives and thank them for their close collaboration with the Council as it fulfills its mandate to foster and promote the study and enjoyment of the arts in Canada and abroad.
And enjoyment and the production of works in the arts. Je crois que cette appréciation,
I think that this notion, this enjoyment, is fundamental. Over the past few years, the Board of Directors has overseen and supported the profound transformation of the Canada Council. This year, in particular, the far-reaching ambitions of this in-depth transformation have become more tangible for everyone concerned, the arts community, Council staff, and our partners.
Remarkable impact in all regions of the country and in every artistic discipline. Needless to say, we are investing these public funds based on, first of all, peer assessment and also the highest artistic, organizational, and ethical standards. This year was also one where we had renewal within the board that I have the honor to chair. We added 6 new colleagues, a clear majority of the membership. I will now take a few moments to introduce them. Jennifer Donner from Montreal, Cheryl Hickman from St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, Jan Martel from Saskatoon, Ben Nin from Yellowknife, and Jesse Wente from Toronto. And also David Binet from Toronto couldn't be here today. I invite you to read their bios on the council website. It will give you an idea of the diversity and the scope of the expertise that now sits around the board table. I believe that the selection process established by the federal government has ensured broad geographical representation and a wide spectrum of expertise needed for governing an organization as essential as the Canada Council. I might add this process is designed to find highly qualified candidates in an open and transparent manner. The candidates chosen, I'm sure, will perform their duties with integrity and diligence. As board chair, I am proud of the new members we've added to an already very solid team. These women and men submitted their candidacies and underwent a rigorous selection process. They're here because they grasp the importance of the arts in Canada and its public funding, and because they want to contribute to the advancement of the arts for the benefits of all Canadians. At this time, I would also like to recognize the other members of our solid team for the past year. Vice Chair Nathalie Bondil from Montreal, Beverly Foy from Calgary, and Cheryl Schaff from Winnipeg. We also have Isabelle Hudon, but I'll talk more about her a little later. In short, the current composition of the board meets all the requirements now expected in terms of diversity of background and knowledge, as well as the crucial inclusion of professional artists on the board. All well and good, you'd say. Well, what exactly does the board do? So please bear with me as I give you a bit of a thumbnail sketch of the essential role that plays within the council. Le conseil d'administration veille entre autres à ce que l'organisation.
The board makes sure that we reach the performance level that's expected, therefore is playing a key role. He ensures the quality and compliance of strategies, plans, and actions executed by management and staff meet these expectations. Board must also assess risks. I see the board as an entity that is willing to put ideas to the test, and also an entity that not only focuses on the here and now, but is sufficiently detached to ask critical questions and make objective evaluations. And all of this becomes possible only if each board member is free to express their opinions while being attentive and respectful to others. When all said is done, the board is the ultimate guarantor of dynamic and responsible governance to ensure that public monies are managed in the interest of all Canadians. This responsibility is all the more relevant during this period of transformation and the incremental doubling of the council budget from $150 million in 2015 to $310 million in 2021. More than ever, we need to report on and be accountable for our decisions. Personally, I'm a firm believer in public funding for the arts. I also believe that it's important for all Canadians to be aware of the role public funding plays in their individual and collective lives.
When I joined the council, I was far from convinced that Canadians knew anything about the Canada Council and its role. However, a year in my mandate, a public awareness survey in 2017 showed how wrong I was. A much higher percentage than I thought of the population could identify the council and its mission. Indeed, the Canada Council received the highest spontaneous awareness rating of all the cultural funding organizations in that particular survey. What's even more interesting is that 75% of Canadians across all age groups, all household income levels, express comparable degrees of support for public fundings of the arts in Canada. Now, let me tell you, I was never so happy to be wrong. On more than one occasion this year, I have observed how active the Canada Council is in the field and what an impact its initiatives are having. I'm not just referring to the Council's arts initiative, but also the activities of the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, which operates under the Council's aegis. The Commission's hashtag It Starts With Me campaign for the elimination of racial discrimination reached more than 2 million people on Twitter and galvanized government ministers, elected officials, municipalities, and mayors, as well as hundreds of organizations to join the ongoing effort to combat discrimination. La portée de nos partenariats est aussi remarquable.
The scope of our partnership is also remarkable, and the board can well attest. These partnerships provide substantial leverage for advancing Council's commitment. For example, the Council's partnership with the Salzburg Global Seminar will enable 5 young Canadians to participate annually in this international seminar over the next 4 years. These participants will make up the initial group of cultural innovators in Canada. The seminar will also give them an opportunity to acquire leadership skill and form strategic ties with other cultural innovators from around the world. And finally, I'd like to make a reference to the departure and contributions of the board member Isabelle Hudon, whose term expired this year. And she played a key role in implementing the Arts and Culture Welcome Refugees initiative in response to the Syrian refugee crisis in 2016, and should also be commended for this kind of engagement outside the board. I'm sure that in her current position as Canada's ambassador in France, she will be a valuable ally, not only for the Council, but also for stimulating the outreach of Canadian arts in France and the rest of Europe and the world. I would also like to thank our Director and CEO, Simon Brault, for his leadership throughout this transformative year. The Council underwent many changes, and Simon kept it on track. Of course, it would not have been possible without the dedication, passion, and unremitting work of all our employees. I therefore wish to thank and congratulate all of them for a job well done. So, together, we will always continue to do a better job of supporting and promoting the arts in Canada and around the world. Thank you so much. And for those watching on the web, thank you for listening. I'll give the floor now to our CEO, Mr. Simon Brault.
Merci beaucoup, Pierre.
Thanks very much, Pierre.
For having been so passionately and skillfully guiding our huge effort to deliver on Council's strategic commitments. And this at a time of rapid transformation, adaptation to emerging realities, and at a moment of historically important reinvestment in the arts sector. I know that I'm speaking for all my colleagues at Council when I say that to the board that your engagement and support motivate us to excel. For a number of years now, we have been holding our annual public meeting 9 months after our fiscal year. We do this because we can report not only on the year that finished last March, but also because we can talk about what's going on during the current year. The 2016-17 year was the first year of the deployment of our 5-year strategic plan called Shaping a New Future. As it happens, this 5 years of the plan coincides precisely with the period during which our budget will be doubled incrementally. With the total amount of grants we award to artists, visual writers, and arts organizations increasing from $150 million in 2015 to $310 million in 2021. The plan sets out a series of measurable commitments towards an artistic renaissance firmly based on a daring quest for artistic and literary advances, on clear affirmation of indigenous creation, on diversity in all its forms and expression, on inclusiveness, entrenchment, and impact of the arts in communities across Canada, on greater international exposure for artists, and on enhanced mastery of all the potentialities of the digital revolution. The plan also guides our additional investments and support not only new voices that are reflecting the preoccupations and the concerns of our society, but also more experienced, I would say more mature voices that the Canada Council has held consistently over the last few years and sometimes over the last decades. Au Conseil, l'année 2016-2017 a commencé.
The 2016-2017 year at the Council began in a state of crisis, with a touch of euphoria as well, because on 22nd March 2016, the Department of Finance tabled its momentous budget, announcing an injection of $1.9 billion. Yes, $1.9 billion, I repeat, for the cultural sector, because investing in the Canadian cultural sector helps to create jobs, strengthens the economy, and ensures that the unique Canadian perspective is shared with the world. As soon as we received authorization, we invested the initial funds allocated to us in the arts sector under a special one-time program called New Chapter, which was created on the occasion of the 150th anniversary of Confederation. It had a budget of some $35 million, wholly devoted to supporting exceptional artistic creation projects on a scale that would otherwise have been beyond our capacity. I told the artists and arts organizations to think big, and the response was incredible. We received 2,226 project proposals requesting a total of more than $400 million, over 10 times the available budget. And yet, there were those who still said that it would be impossible to follow through with projects on this scale and quality in such a short time. The $35 million ended up financing 201 projects. Many new applicants answered the call, and 14% of them received a grant for the first time. In terms of both the money involved and the fact that it was awarded in a very short period of time, the New Chapter project proved to be one of the most important artistic creation and innovation initiatives ever implemented by the Council or by any other similar entity in Canada. The arts projects that received grants represent a legacy that will continue to be explored, appreciated, and transmitted for years to come. New Chapter is already suggesting that we're on the cusp of the next major creative cycle in which the arts will become an everyday part of life in Canada, in part because new forms of collaboration were developed and we allowed ourselves to work differently on several fronts and on a larger scale as well. By including all forms of art and literature, a number of historical conventions and certitudes were challenged. And new perspectives on our lives and on our collective personal and identity aspirations came to the fore. In short, a re-enchantment with the world became the order of the day.
To screen a video made by Propeller Dance, an organization that received a New Chapter grant. But I should point out that this video has nothing to do with the creative project currently underway as a result of this special grant. We selected an excerpt from previous work by Propeller Dance, which focuses on arts and disability, a field we will highlight at the launch of constructed identities in a few minutes. The video, called Circuit, features a choreography by Shara Weaver, and I think she's here today. She's here. The principal dancers are Sami Elkoit and Sylvain Bouchard, who is in a wheelchair. So, video now. Merci, c'est superbe.
Thank you. Fantastic. Superb. I would ask you to consult our 2016-2017 annual report to add the stories and figures part of our website to find out a bit more on our programs.
Circumstances in the spring of 2016 that led to the creation of New Chapter program. Needless to say, our only option at the time was to invest in projects, even though we were well aware that the need to provide more core grants to organizations had become critical. Falling back on some form of mathematical formula to disperse, to sprinkle all the new fund that had been allocated to the Council was out of question. It was essential for us to honor the historic vote of confidence received from the government by remaining faithful to the objectives and the philosophy of the new funding model announced prior to the federal budget, and by respecting the specific financial commitment of our strategic plan and the gradual doubling of our budget over 5 years. The financial commitments announced in December 2016 by the Canada Council were that we would award 80.5% of the additional funds in the form of grants, payments, and prizes to artists and arts organizations. This is a very large proportion. That we would increase the total funds allocated to core grants by 55%, again over 5 years, and project grants by 224%, in order at the end of the 5 years to have a 50-50 basis of core funding and project funding. That we would triple our support to Indigenous art. That we would double our investment in international support to enhance the global presence of the art sector, and that we would invest $80.5 million in the Digital Strategy Fund. And finally, we made also a very bold commitment, and that commitment is that 25% of the additional funds would go to first-time recipients. The expectations of the 1,150 organizations with which the Council maintains ongoing relations of funding were, of course, very high, if not overly optimistic and perhaps even unreasonable. And I can readily understand this. I could easily understand why it was the case, because I myself directed an institution for more than 25 years, chasing constantly after inadequate public funding just to keep going. The combined applications for core grants that we received came to an amount well beyond available funds. And to date, and it's important to remind that number, we have received approximately 20% of the total increase promised by the government as expected. Given that we wanted to reinvest all of our core funding programs at the same time, the virtually simultaneous administration of numerous competitions required such complex logistics that Council was pushed to its very limit. We had to rethink or modify absolutely everything without the time needed to test, to try runs, and become proficient in the new systems, deadlines, guidelines, reassignment of staff to new teams, etc. We also repeatedly encountered information technology and other technological challenges and obstacles, bugs of various kinds, and a number of communication issues, both internal and external. Even if we were recently able to release the results to all the organizations, it was only because of the expertise, the dedication, tenacity, and professionalism of all of our staff, who never threw the towel and remained determined to meet the legitimate expectations of the artists and organizations seeking our support. We were also very fortunate in being able to rely on the patience, understanding, and solidarity of the arts community throughout this perilous transition. And on behalf of myself and all of our staff, I'd like to express our deeply felt thanks to all the artists, managers, and volunteer board members for that. Évidemment, il faut aussi reconnaître que nous ne pouvions pas prendre.
Of course, this could not have been done so quickly without the mobilization of hundreds of artists, authors, cultural managers who generously agreed to sit on our peer assessment committee. These committees, which are central to the granting process, handling the essential task of assessing the merits of the application to council, believe me when I say that it's an extremely demanding task. Not only do the peers have to understand, interpret, and contextualize the objectives and criteria of our programs, and also be aware of developments and issues in their respective fields, they must also contribute to in-depth, genuine, rigorous, well-informed, and subtle discussions to analyze the intentions of the organizations, and also to judge the relative merits and impacts of their artistic approaches, plans, and projects. By comparing applications, the committees are required to rank them in order of merit, and council is required to comply with this final ranking in allocating grants, with due regard, of course, to established budgets and strategic priorities. A peer assessment means that qualitative decisions are made by professionals from the arts community. These assessments, which determine the vast majority of our financial decisions, are not made by the council itself. Peer assessment is anything but a top-down approach. The Canada Council can take pride in being one of the few organizations in the entire world to use peer assessment as a method for determining where its investments go, including its core grants. Of course, no system is perfect, and I would distrust anyone who might claim to have an infallible recipe for optimally distributing public funds to artists and organizations dedicated to artistic creation and dissemination. Even though some people may be unhappy, and they have the right to be unhappy sometimes, with the outcomes of certain peer assessments, I believe that there is still a broad consensus in the arts community that the existing system is one of the fairest and most thorough, even though it remains eminently perfectible.
For grant recipients. A brief analysis of the results will reveal that there have been a positive transformation in the arts and cultural landscape, including the following: a landscape in which the most highly rated Indigenous organizations of this country now received historic additional resources, a landscape in which eagerly anticipated increases have breathed new life into the most highly rated cultural diverse organizations, a landscape in which the most successful organizations in minority language communities have had their core grants increased significantly, a landscape in which highly rated disability arts, contemporary circus, and digital arts organizations can shine as they receive core funding for the first time contemporary circus and digital arts practices, and a landscape in which the organization run by our top creators, the most highly rated literary publishers, and our most innovative service organizations and institutions will receive a lot of additional support. Actually, out of 1,154 organizations, we count more or less 34% of all those organizations who did not get a raise. All the others got a raise or became for the first time recipient of core funding. 10% are new recipients of core funding at the Canada Council. This is massive. But this artistic landscape, as it is today, is not carved in stone. It's dynamic. It will continue to evolve for the better. Those organizations that may be, at this point, disappointed with the results of the first wave of reinvestment by the Canada Council should remember that this is only the first wave. They can try again by working to improve their applications, and additional funds will be available because we are only in the second year of the gradual doubling of our budget. At present, this year, we still have to allocate approximately 25% of our annual budget, more or less $47 million, in form of project grants, including the $10 million of the Digital Strategy Fund, which is also open to organizations receiving core grants. In the fall, after we will have completed a full year of the new funding model, we will publish all the results, and everyone will be able to have full access to the data, distribution by region, artistic discipline, type of applicants, etc., etc. We will then determine where we stand in terms of all the strategic commitments mentioned earlier. Comme vous le savez, en mars 2017,
As you know, in March 2017, we held the Arts in a Digital World Summit in Montreal. We invited experts in many different fields from various parts of the country and the world to join us to discuss digital issues and the arts in the 21st century. We took part in the discussions, but we mainly listened to what participants had to say. And what they had to say was fascinating, inspiring, and relevant. I was transfixed by their open-mindedness and original way of approaching the various topics. The summit was definitely a place for sharing knowledge, ideas, desires, and interests. So much so that many participants who did not know one another said they were interested in working together and becoming ambassadors for the Digital Strategy Fund. We decided on a fund rather than a program because it gives us more flexibility. The purpose of the fund is to speed up the digital transformation of the arts sector in Canada. Last fall, we received over 250 applications for the first competition, and I think the first jury will be meeting this Thursday, and the results will be released over the coming months. What I really want the fund to do is to encourage the arts community to work differently and collectively, to avoid the competitive mindset according to which success for one means the decline of the other, and to think now about the diversity of skills and perspectives as an unparalleled richness in an age of algorithms that often cloisters us. Like you, I can see that there's been rapid progress in the field of artificial intelligence in cities like Montreal and Toronto, and every time leaders in the field are asked about it, they mention things like coordination and the dizzying speed at which knowledge and discoveries are shared. Surely there are lessons here for our own sector. I've travelled around the world enough to see that the future looks rather bright for Canada at the moment. Only a few days ago, at a town hall in Ontario, our Prime Minister spoke at length about how important artists and the Canada Council are for our communities and the world. because they spread the values that are dear to us. Values like inclusiveness, freedom of expression, and social justice for all. In my view, it's no accident that the elected head of a G7 country spoke on this topic early in 2018. We're lucky to be living at a time when there is a renewed recognition of the civilizing impact of arts and culture, and we need to make the most of it, I think. In the huge funding ecosystem for the arts and culture and even the creative economy, the progressive doubling of our budget must allow the Canada Council to remain a leader in providing support, promotion, and recognition as well for artistic and literary creation, and more importantly, in engaging Canadians in the process.
And it needs to contribute to the advancement of this society in more ways than one. Our decisions at Canada Council affect the economy, employment, international trade, public diplomacy, the way we live together, dealings between people and communities, affirmation of groups and nations whose rights and dignity have been violated, and the ability of those overwhelmed by the noise of the triumphant majorities to make their voices heard. Art is a vehicle for the free dissemination of values, choices, ideas, feelings, and emotions. That's what makes it fascinating, attractive, and sometimes threatening for the one who have absolute power. The Canada Council cannot remain silent or neutral when values that are at the core of what it does are suppressed or denied. This is precisely why, to mention only one example, we recently published a nuanced but firm position on the appropriation of Indigenous culture, a position that was, of course, not unanimous, even within the cultural communities themselves. But I would like to reiterate that wanting to support Indigenous artistic creation and advocating genuine reconciliation in a country that has finally acknowledged that it systematically practices cultural genocide against Indigenous peoples for more than 100 years, demanded that we had the courage, or at least the decency, to take a stand against the shameless pillaging of Indigenous cultures. We choose to change and adapt, but not to censure. Our intention was to give the peer assessors the tools they need for well-informed and sound evaluations. Once again, in a spirit of addressing the social and ethical dimensions of our mandate, we recently drew a statement against harassment and in favor of respect in the workplace. Our statement is also very clear and firm. We consider that harassment, sexual misconduct, and the abuse of power have no place in the workplace under any circumstances. We are also conscious that our role as Canada Council is not to act as a substitute for the judicial system by actively policing the organizations and artists to whom we provide funding. We have neither the responsibility nor the skills or the means to do so. But yet, we have values that we must affirm and uphold. As we previously announced, we are at present reviewing our granting policies to ensure that they are provided with mechanisms that would allow us to fairly and more effectively deal with situations that could jeopardize the safety or dignity of artists or the public, and that could cast doubt on why and how much we award to a given organizations from public fund. We have decided to look clearly and empathetically at our society, and it is now and will be in the future from the standpoints of equity, social justice, respect, and inclusiveness. Le secteur des arts n'en a pas fini avec
The
des...
arts sector will certainly have to engage in other difficult conversations and deal with inevitable major behavioral changes. One is only to look at what's happening in other countries to understand that it is essential to methodically prepare and engage in these conversations in a balanced, nuanced, and intelligent manner. The integrity and credibility of our institutions depend on us doing so. Our public arts funding model is admired around the world, and it must continue to be in step with Canadian society by avoiding serious mistakes and inappropriate shortcuts. I've often spoken about shared leadership, and I believe that it's truly applicable to our relationship with society and arts community as a whole. Dialogue with the community is essential if we are to understand its issues, concerns, expectations, and needs as well. Council must listen to and act upon the feedback it receives so that we can move ahead together. I'd like to end with a quote from the philosopher Henri Bergson, who famously said, "The future is not what's going to happen, but what we make of it." Let's make it together. Thank you.
Merci, Simon. Merci, Pierre.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Pierre.
25 minutes, and I'd like to remind you that we can't speak to specific applications or files due to confidentiality reasons. That's my difficult word today. So please keep your questions more general. We will take questions from the room as well as through our social media, so please send them to #Council18, mot-clic Conseil18. Vous pouvez nous poser vos questions sur Twitter avec le mot-clic.
You can ask questions on Twitter with the hashtag.
Right at the back of the room so that we can capture your question for the web audience. Pour vous donner le temps de formuler vos questions, je vais maintenant tourner vers...
So now I will ask my colleagues Mireille Allard et Iliane Laberge, who are with us, who got some questions online to see if they received any. In the past few months, we noted a few current issues that concern us and that resonated for us, and we wanted to start by answering these questions. Mireille, Eliane, could you please launch the question period? Thank you, Tammy. Council actually received several questions by email and through social networks. So here's the first one. Council talked against cultural appropriation last fall. Does it mean for Council that non-native artists cannot get their inspiration from native culture in their work? No, that's not what it means. I think it's impossible when you think of it to get to true reconciliation if there are no gestures or writing that come from both sides, from Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal groups. What the council said is that we think it's truly important that an artist who chooses to talk about, to include elements of Aboriginal culture, that this artist or organization entertains a true conversation with the Aboriginal communities to make sure that there is something truly authentic and respectful of Aboriginal traditions, rights, and dignity. So our position is not aiming at preventing interaction between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. No, we simply want to remind that in a decolonization environment, we must pay a specific attention to the voice of those who were victim of the colonization. Thank you, Simon.
In the last 45 minutes, so we will try to get to all of them. I just want to remind everyone that if we don't get to them during the APM, we will answer all questions on the council website in the coming weeks. Another important question that has come up is in regards to the wave of allegations of harassment, sexual misconduct, or abuse of power in the arts milieu, and you made mention of it in your speech, Simon. Should public funders cut funding to organizations shaken by such allegations?
Again, it's a big question. I think it's really important to make the distinctions between different levels of allegations. It moves from nasty gossips to serious allegations to documented allegations and to proofs in front of a court. And I think where the Canada Council is not, again, we're not in the logic of punishment, this is not our logic. Our logic is to make sure that, again, and this will be changes that are coming in our policy, is to make sure that the organizations who get public funding make the commitment to respect the law, but also make the commitment towards a safe workplace. And if this commitment is not respected, we would consider that it's threatening our investment in that organization. But our first reflex is not to punish, it's not to judge. Our first reflex is to make sure that there will be a promotion of safe workplace. And in the cases where it's not happening, that we will have the tools in order to monitor our grants towards those organizations.
Lovely lady that's been waiting patiently.
Yes.
Thank you, and thank you for all your remarks, Simon. My name is Penny McCann. I'm the director of Saw Video here in Ottawa. I'm an established media artist, and I'm also here on behalf of the Media Arts Network of Ontario, which is also called MANO. And as you've outlined, there's been so much tremendous change taking place at Council. What is that? At Council.
Channel.
Sorry, it's this mic. I'll lower it a bit. At Council. And we're just now beginning to see the shape of that change and some positive results emerging. However, there have been changes to the transparency regarding adjudication and the peer review process that MANO feels must be improved. Our main concern remains the changes to the peer assessment process, and you talked a bit about that earlier, and our concerns lie in the fact that the process has changed from one where juries make monetary decisions to a new system where peer assessment committees rank applications and then staff make the specific decisions regarding grant amounts. And this is a significant procedural shift in the function of peer assessment, and one that we think that we would like to see more clarity on and reviewed. We understand that staff have and continue to act instrumentally have always acted instrumentally in the granting process, but we'd like the council to be more transparent about the role and responsibility of peer assessors and Canada Council staff under the new granting processes. So we'll be sending a list of questions such as, if peer assessors are ranking organizations exclusively, but staff are making final decisions about grant amounts, what is the role ultimately of that ranking in the decision making? So this is about clarification. What metrics guide staff decisions? How are discussions and decisions by staff recorded and archived, and can applicants access those records? And so these are things that are currently not explained well in the current policies on the Canada Council website. And so we'd like the Canada Council to make that more clear so artists, organizations, and the public understand the role of peer assessors in grant making. And we ask that content be made available online. So we're all aware, and that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. When I came to the council, one thing that became very obvious to me, you're coming from media art, I'm coming from theater, and when I came to the council, one of the first thing I did is trying to understand how the different disciplines were acting in terms of their process with juries. And I discovered that it was not the same way, the same practice across the board. In some discipline, juries were much more involved in the nitty-gritty of fixing amounts of money. In other discipline, they were less involved. They were more on the qualitative side of the assessment, and staff was playing a bigger role. Then what I did is I also asked the question, is it true? Is it really true, legally true at Canada Council that juries can award public money? And the response I got was, no, it's untrue. There's a perception that juries were awarding the money, but in fact, public money cannot be awarded by juries. Public money, under the delegation of authority coming from Treasury Board and all of that, it's the board of the Canada Council for anything over 500,000, and then its staff at different level of the organization. So there was, especially in some artistic discipline, some kind of an urban legend about how what was the exact role of the juries in fixing the amounts. The third thing we did is observing what is done elsewhere in the world. And we discovered by doing so that even in Canada, but especially worldwide, we were more or less the only place where juries could believe that they were discussing and awarding the exact amount of money. On top of that, it became very obvious in the context of, because it's one thing to have a jury and a very small budget and you move, I don't know, $50,000. It's very different than to deliver commitment of $160 million over 5 years. So how do you manage priorities? How do you not be stuck in disciplinary budget, because we don't have disciplinary budget per se now. So to change everything we did, we decided that we would come back to what we consider to be the very essence of the jury system at the Canada Council. And it did not take us long to figure this out, because in fact, it has been the way it was done at the Canada Council during the first decades of the Canada Council. During the first decades of the Canada Council, juries were fundamentally evaluating the merit of the applications and ranking them, and the decisions were made, and they were always made, even by juries who were making recommendations. The juries never had the authority to make those decisions. So what we did is we recrafted all the policies of the council, and yes, we can make it clearer and clearer and clearer. It's the first round that we just did with that, with all those adjustments. But I can tell you that the intention of the council right now, again, it's not a matter of being transparent, because we need to be transparent. Because don't imagine that the list that the juries are producing, the ranking, those will be, we need them to make the decisions. You can be absolutely convinced that the Auditor General and that all the audit the council gets, the first thing they do is they come and they want to see our list to make sure that we respected that ranking and that we did not decide to play with it. And so I think it's a very, it's a system that is very clear, that is very standard all over the world. And do we need to re-explain it, especially for the people who used to work in a different context in some discipline at the Canada Council? I think we need to communicate it more and more clearly, and we will be happy to do so. But clearly what we decided to do was really, again, to come back on the real expertise of the jurors, and the real expertise of the jurors is not about finance and managing huge budgets. It's about making sure that they can assess the merit from an artistic point of view, from a point of view of feasibility, and from a point of view of impact. So this is, I think this is why we did it, and we can explain it more and more and more. And again, we just tried it once, and we will explain it again. Thank you for the question.
Merci, Simon. On a une autre question qui nous est...
Simon, we have another question here that we received by email, a question from Suzanne, who would like to know if the Canada Council accumulates data to know how many organizations receive grants and that are directed by women instead of men. Oh, excellent question. Right now, we don't. What we have are data on peers, men, women, our staff. We have data on our own internal statistics as for gender distribution, but obviously we have to have more data on the organizations that we support. So there are very many ways of getting this information without violating any legislation or regulations. I hear your question, and it's true. It's important for us. It is much more difficult for us to get a statistic than Telefilm, for instance, when they provide grants, because but it is definitely in our plans to have such information, to have a more complete picture, to be able to better analyze the situation and the trends.
Email specific to the portal. Can the Canada Council offer any assurance that all bugs have been worked out of the system going forward into 2018? And are these simply growing pains?
I cannot give. I would be the last person in the world giving any assurance about the fact that we won't have any bugs. I mean, c'est complètement contraire to the development of any new IT application. Are we working on every bug? The answer is yes. There are people at Council from not only from IT, but from the Arts Granting Division. They were meeting this afternoon. I saw them in the cafeteria, a big group of people working. We constantly work to improve the portal. We constantly work to make sure that when something is raised by the clients of the Council, that we address it, in a timely manner. And I must tell you that the last few months have been challenging in terms of our IT systems, but the Canada Council, as many other organizations in town and in the arts sector, is facing a huge challenge of its own digital transformation. We are operating with legacy systems that are quite old or outdated. So over the next few years, there will be a lot of investment and a lot of success and bugs, and I think it's part of trying to adapt and to move into the 21st century, enfin. But we're in it, and so we're working on it. Oui.
Hi, my name's Peter Zanetti. I look on your website, and I had trouble finding your anti-harassment policy. So one thing you could do as a great favor, you have a wonderful mission statement about us, etc. Put a copy of that anti-harassment policy right beside it, because it's saying this is what we want to do, and we are trying to make a safe space to do it. And equally important, have it based on the enumerated grounds of the Canadian Human Rights Act. Those enumerated grounds have been fought long and hard for, and still continue to be, realized. Also, it speaks to transparency, speaks to accountability, but also many of those enumerated grounds still carry a social stigma. I shouldn't have to call you to implicitly out myself or explicitly out myself on any enumerated grounds to see whether it's covered. Because this should be intrinsic to the organization, shouldn't be a secret, should be out there, and then it shows leaderships for other arts organizations to follow.
I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question via Twitter received in the last half hour from @Arts Social Change. Will you commit to reinstating quote-unquote lost disciplines for those presented with significant challenges? #community engaged arts.
I'm not ready to make a commitment like that now. What we're trying to do at Council, as you know, over the last 3 years, we tried to move as much as we can from a disciplinary model to create programs that are more outcome-based, while recognizing a certain number of disciplines that have been, historically supported by the council, and accepting some of the discipline that became more and more important in our daily work. circus art, disability art, and digital. So I'm not saying that we won't examine the possibility of having more discipline in the future. I think that, and we may or we may not, but for sure we absolutely need to go through at least a cycle of grants with the programs we have right now and see what are the gaps, what is the result, in fact, of all those organizations who would like to be, or groups who would like to see their specific practice to be formally recognized. How did they perform in a non-disciplinary model? Is it worthwhile or not? The Canada Council doesn't see it in the future as being the ultimate guardian of each artistic discipline. We think that the ultimate guardians of the discipline are the artists themselves and the organizations they create to advance their discipline. Our role is to make sure that we do support the artists and the organizations, no matter what their discipline or specific field of practice is, according to the outcomes that are to advance creation and everything that we see in the new funding model.
Question from Gregory now sent by email. When will the Canada Council recognize the growing need of elder artists in Canada to have equal support? Ageism seems rampant in the granting landscape.
It's an interesting question, and it's one we're kind of debating, because it's true that you have the question of the elders, you have the question of, as I said, the more mature artists. We also have a huge issue. I'm telling you, our commitment to deliver 25% of first-time applicants is not a walk in the park for the Canada Council. It's very difficult because we did not practice that much over the last years at Council. So I think it's a question, and I think we need to constantly try to understand and read what is the landscape in this country, what are the needs, what is the role of the specific role of the Canada Council in that landscape, how can we partner with other funders to address different issues, and that's certainly one of them. I think that the Canada Council made very, very clear what its commitments are for the next now 3 years. And our priority is to deliver on those commitments. And obviously, we will, 2 years from now, start to craft a new 5 years plan. And we will see what are the issues that need to be addressed over the next 5 years. And maybe one of them, I don't know.
Merci, Simon. On a aussi...
Thank you. We have a comment from Janita for 2018, I hope that the Heritage Minister, Mélanie Joly, is more made aware to the fact that a Canadian Francophone person should be appointed on the board of Canada Council. Yeah, that's right. The way, and the chair talked about it, the appointment process for now at the federal level is a public call of nominations. So the first thing, Janita, we have to look at that there are Acadian candidates interested that will apply, because if there are no people from diversity, from Acadians or Aboriginal that apply to become a member of the board, when the selection is done, and I'm not part of that process, but when they do the selection, they simply can't do it. So in the past, it was really different because the appointments on the board were done directly by the government. Now, the process is indirect. So every time we see that we want to have a better representation of a given group or such an expertise on the board, we have to convince people to apply. And right now in Ottawa, there are many, many positions offered at Canada Council, in museum, everywhere. So definitely there is room for Acadians. And as an Acadian myself, I'm very sensitive to this. Thank you, Simon.
B2 Jamie, if you could give one piece of advice to emerging and aspiring youth artists, what would it be?
work hard. I spent 32 years of my life in a theater school, so something I know well is the challenges of being a young artist or an emerging artist. And I'm surrounded in my family by young artists. And I think that what is really important for the future is for those young artists not to listen to the funders for their future, but to do what they need to do and to express what they need to express, to create their work, to fight for it, and to convince eventually the funders that what they do is worthwhile. And I think it's really, really important because for too long in this country, in theater schools or elsewhere, we used to have people coming from the Canada Council explaining, if you want to succeed, do that, and I think that's the old world. I think the new world is really for the funders to adapt to the needs, to support the artists more and more on their own terms, as opposed to be prescriptive and trying to convince them to fit our boxes because it's more easy for us.
Another email question from Paula about funding for digital media. She gives the example of podcasts. What can the Canada Council for the Arts do to help podcasters achieve their visions in a sustainable way?
It's a good question. Again, the way we think right now is that we don't ask ourselves, how do we support the community of podcasters? What we say is that we have those programs supporting, artistic creation and the sharing of literature and all of that. And no matter what the platform you choose to use, could be podcast, could be any other platform, the platform is not the factor determinant. The platform is not the driver. The driver is the content. I know we supported some projects in the New Chapter, with the New Chapter program where podcasts were involved. We still do in many different projects. So I think it's a fantastic platform. It's a very dynamic community. It's very strong in some cities, and there's a big future for them. But again, we don't look at it from the perspective of would we support podcasters, but more, what is it that they want to share? And what is the content they want to share? And if it's artistically or literally striking, they should get support at Canada Council, and they can use whatever they want to share.
A question now from Elliot, sent by email. He's an author. When will the huge funds given to the Canada Council for the Arts start to support Canadian writers in need like me?
Anytime, actually. The Canada Council, it's interesting, and I will certainly complain that we don't have enough money. But the funds of the Canada Council, and we see that now, are not that huge. The needs are huge outside. And over the last few weeks, I realized that for a lot of our clients out there, because there was the promise that our budget was doubled, a lot of people think it's already doubled. So when is the money coming? The money is not there yet. It's incremental. And the Canada Council has many priorities. But for authors, I must say that one of the decisions that I did not mention in my speech, and I don't mention that enough often, is that we decided to reinvest $5 million in the PLR, which is the Public Lending Right Commission. And that program is supporting published authors or translators when they are published and their books are in the library system. And it's a way to give money and to support directly authors and translators without any intermediary. So it's a direct injection. So I don't know if you published yet, but if you have book published, watch for the new investment. We start reinvesting $2.5 million more this year in the PLR, the year to come, 1st of April.
Merci. We have only 5 minutes left, so this might be the last question from @BrendaLeadley from Twitter. How does the CCA evaluate the criteria of professionalism and artistic excellence when assessing organizations who have community-engaged arts practices?
We do assess, no matter what your practice is, no matter what your discipline is, no matter where you are in Canada, you will be assessed the same way. So it's always first and foremost the artistic criteria. I mean, if you don't pass the test of artistic achievement, everything else become more or less irrelevant. So it's first that, and then its impact depending of the program, depending on which program you are. So it's the same approach. And the question of the knowledge or the context in which those organizations are practicing is impacting by the making of the jury. So if we feel that we have many organizations to evaluate or to assess that are sharing a same field of practice, we will make sure that on the jury there will be people who have a knowledge of that field of practice in order to be able to contextualize their demand in the context of our program. So we don't tailor our support according to the needs of a specific practice, but we tailor our support to according to the goals of each program, and we contextualize it with peers who have a knowledge of the specific practice.
More from @Philip, received via Twitter, but a few days ago, I believe. What is the status of Canada Council's support for experimental fiction and artists' books following an intense internal review and the subsequent release of the council-wide funding model?
We do support experimental fiction. And actually, with the new funding model, it's fair to say that where the Canada Council is going in terms of supporting writing and publishing is really towards support more and more in a more and more consistent way literature, more than books, but literature. Books is a way to distribute and share literature. I think it's really important because I know that in that domain there's a lot of emerging or small organizations who are surfacing, and I think it's really important. I was following on my own Twitter feed over the last few weeks discussions with publishers who were saying, oh, we have been denied by the Canada Council, and then I just dig into the file and discover that they were not denied, they were not accepted as core-funded organizations before they got project grants, and they can still get project grants. But the Canada Council was not this time, was very, very strict on the number of new core-funded clients. I said it's 10% more or less that were accepted, because we feel that there's more and more ways of supporting artistic practice or publishing activities that are not necessarily core permanent funding, but that are project fundings or that are composite grants, so it means it's project but predictable over many years. So yes, we will continue to support that, no doubt. Again, the quality is the determining factor.
Merci. Simon, thank you. I think we
Merci.
can wrap it up.
Oui. C'est toi qui rappe ou c'est moi? OK.
Alors, merci Simon.
So thank you very much, Simon. Thanks, Pierre. Thanks to all of you for being with us here this afternoon. Now, I'd like to remind you that you can find the speeches on our website. They'll be available in both official languages very soon. Now, in terms of the questions that we haven't had time to answer today, they'll also be published on the website.
Of the event. Thank you so much to all of you who are watching online. Stay, those of you who are in the room, because I'm going to give you instructions in a moment. Pour ceux ici dans la salle.
Those of you in the room, well, first of all, thank you to everyone who took part online.
Participating online, and have a wonderful evening.
Now, for those of you who are in the room, I'd now like to invite you to join us on the ground floor for the launching of the new exhibition downstairs. Now, the works, Persimmon Blackbridge works are fascinating. In my opinion, they're part of the art and disability discipline. You'll be hearing from Barak Ade Soleil, who will be presenting the exhibition.
Belongings will be brought downstairs to the ground floor. It's our way of encouraging you to come to our reception this evening. Alors, si vous êtes parmi nous dans la salle.
So if you're here in the room, your personal belongings will be brought downstairs. Now we'd like to invite you to join us for our reception downstairs. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your evening.